So every day your work relies on your scientific background, and it's interwoven into the policy decisions we make. How would you say, what's the significance of women being engaged both from an internal and an external perspective? And is there anything unique that you believe you bring to the table as a woman as it relates to our policy decisions at the agency?
Gosh, that's a good question. And it's really relevant, I think, for today, particularly as a woman scientist and working with regulatory or policy and with our local stakeholders, which that's what I do, is I work a lot with our local cities and stakeholders and municipalities and environmental groups and nonprofit groups, which is really exciting. But I would say that one of the most important things is to include women in the dialogue and the decision-making process. And it's very critical because oftentimes I think as a woman, if you're part of the dialogue, you can see different types of solutions that are being placed at the table. More focus on collaborative solutions with all the stakeholders involved and the parties involved in the room. And so where we try to find out strategic solutions by looking at all the parties and outside. And I'll give you a really good example. I'm actually working on a project in Ventura County, just north of here, on steelhead protection. These are steelhead fish, and they travel basically, from the ocean to the headwaters. And we're working on some major, avenues and approaches to try to protect those populations. And actually, there is a regulation involved where we could regulate and say you must meet certain water quality limits, you must have so much flow, for example. But we've decided that it's better to try to see if there are other avenues to work with the local private water users, with the local municipalities, and try to see if that could actually garner folks to be empowered and encouraged to move forward. And so that's become really, really positive and successful because the group would much rather on their own come up with solutions to try to achieve protection for the steelheads, for example, than try to necessarily have this kind of framework strict. We still have the framework under Clean Water Act, but EPA is trying to look at those kind of innovative solutions to work with the different groups. So I think that's one area where it's great, where we're trying to think outside the box as women and working with the local entities. So I think it's my turn to ask you some questions.
Okay.
So Stephanie, this past March for Women's History Month, the administrator hosted more than 100 women at the White House, focusing on the theme of women in the environment. Why was this important for Administrator Jackson, and how does it relate to expanding this conversation on the environment for us?
Well, first I would say women rule the world. So, thank you. It was important for us to bring together a cross-section of women to begin having a much more rounded dialogue about environmental protection and the various things that women can do to take an active role in this issue. We have the women that are working in environmental organizations and have a particular focus on their work, but we also have women who are working in engineering and science and technology who have a different focus on their work. And then we have women who work with young girls who we should be encouraging to take an interest in this kind of work. So it was actually, the purpose was to have this larger networking opportunity to bring those groups together, to the point that you made earlier, finding opportunities for those various organizations to collaborate. And it was very interesting when we broke up in smaller groups and people started to talk about the various projects that they were working on, that while they were all leaders in their particular fields with their particular organizations, they were surprised to find out that others in their group were doing some of the same similar things, but yet they weren't working together. So we were really just trying to create some new networking opportunities and also scale up some of the really great things that are going on in communities to a much larger national level. The other part, I'll say too, it was also about bringing in diverse stakeholders. Bring in stakeholders that you would not necessarily consider to be, air quotes, environmentalists, but who are actually working on community development activities that have a huge environmental impact. And so being able to get those stakeholders to understand that while they don't define themselves as environmentalists, they're actually doing environmental related work.
That's interesting. So you're talking about this diverse audience that you've mentioned, in addition to working with women also. Can you explain what you mean by this diverse audience and how this expanding the conversation on environment has helped to kind of improve our communication of environmental information to the public?
Well, part of it is about allowing people the opportunity to opt in as opposed to opt out. So there have been times when you talk about environmental work and it's kind of all or nothing. So you have to drive a certain kind of car for fuel efficiency. You have to have a certain kind of transportation lifestyle. You have to recycle. You have to use certain kinds of products. There's sort of this definition that certain communities don't necessarily opt into because they don't see themselves in that place. So it's really about changing the way we talk about the environment to allow people to find their personal connection, how it impacts them and their homes and their communities, and then allowing them to take a personal stake and being able to make a difference. I think one of the more interesting ways that we're doing this right now is our work with certain segments, certain demographics and or populations. One of the segments that we're working with is the sports community. And we started that work primarily around measurements, around energy efficiency and waste conservation. But as the stadiums and arenas began to do more of this work and they began to see an economic benefit, they wanted to find out how to actually translate that to their fan base. And it looks different in different places. In Seattle, a game day activity might be to receive your own composting kit. But in Cincinnati, when we're doing work with the Cincinnati Reds, a game day activity is to actually receive a Cincinnati Reds t-shirt that used to be a plastic bottle. But it's just finding these unique ways for people to have their own aha moment as it relates to the environment. And then, they sort of get in where they fit in and do their part as opposed to feeling as though they have to embrace all of the tenets of being an environmentalist in a wholesale fashion.
I just want to bring up, it's really interesting because last year I was talking to some farmers actually out in Ventura County, and I think one farmer had their own aha moment where they realized, they were basically applying pesticides, obviously for growth and then the water. And at one point we were talking about maybe they could have some monitoring of, the discharge that comes off their land. And I think there was an aha moment when he realized, wait a minute, if I can monitor this and install different types of watering techniques, that would be cheaper for me. And also it would reduce that discharge flow to their downstream neighbors for their farmers who were kind of working with him at that same time. So I think that's really key because, working with the different sectors of groups, for them to try to figure out what fits them for their lifestyle.
That's right. That's right. The environment isn't very different from many other issues where you have to find out what's in it for me. And what's in it for me may not be what's in it for you. So as long as I'm doing my part, then I'm good.
Yeah. Yes, right.
Great.